Mm.
All right, welcome everyone. Come on in. Just make sure we've got everyone through from the waiting room. All right, this month we have a very special masterclass with Cathryn Berger Kaye. I met Cathryn a number of years ago when she was doing some workshops for Professional Learning International in Europe. And Cathryn's work has always inspired me to think more deeply about how we integrate service learning into our curriculum. So this year I've also invited Cathryn Berger Kaye to come and be a keynote speaker at the CBI Learning Labs conference in Luxembourg in November. And she's also going to do a full one-day workshop. So if you are interested in the work that she is sharing today and you can get yourself to Europe in
Yeah.
November, we would both love to meet you there. All right, I'm going to hand over to Cathryn now and we'll get started.
So thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here. I see familiar faces. Hello to those I know, and hi to all those folks I've not yet met. Hopefully, we'll be knowing each other by the end of today. So thank you for joining, and thank you, Rachel, for inviting me. So
Absolutely.
the topic today is this really service learning? It's a question that comes up quite often. I've often arrived at a school and they'll say, we have this story. Is this service learning? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it just needs some movement or some tweaking to get there. I also had a conversation this week with a gal from overseas, and she said, my students approach service learning like a tick box. We're just trying to get something done, but we're not really going deep into the process. So that's also some of these things we want to look at as we're looking at service learning. So just a little bit about me. I'm the author of some books, The Complete Guide to Service Learning and two books with Philippe Cousteau. I'm an international educator. I'm a thinker. I do in-person and virtual learning opportunities. I just started tap dance. Things you need to know about me, which I'm loving. I might do some tap dance in Luxembourg, Rachel. You never know. And I know it's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah,
Uh,
love that.
and I'm a grandmother, so I keep myself pretty occupied with some wonderful things. And always love to hear from teachers. So I hope some of you will follow up and contact me and let me know what you're doing in your schools to advance service learning. A reminder, yes? Okay, so we got this down. Thank you for abiding by that. So the guiding questions for today are, is this really service learning, as I mentioned? And also, is service learning a catch-all phrase for any time a student does good on behalf of others? We could see how that could happen. I'd like to be more specific about how we use the language. I always want students to do good. That's part of the process of just growing up and being part of our school communities. But does that mean it's service learning? Let's think about that. And could there be criteria that help you make sense of what service learning is that works across most settings and contexts? And the answer to that is yes. And I'm going to share what I think are some of the key essential elements of service learning. And then what's the spark? What sparks meaningful service learning and purposeful action? And there's so many things that does that. So we're going to touch on some, and I'm sure you have many other ideas. So we're going to look at this before and after construct just for a moment. We might be bringing in some misconceptions about service learning that can derail the process. And one of the key ones that often happens that I hear is service learning is an add-on. How many of you have heard that? Is that something you've heard quite a bit? Rachel, I know you have, yes? Yeah, that it's an add-on. And when we have that, that's a big misconception. And that really defeats what service learning is about. So we want to just throw that out the window and give room for some new ideas. And it starts with creating a common understanding of what service learning is to set a stage for a more unified school-wide approach, because language defines the culture. And at every school I go to, even if they think they have their definition of service learning, we always need to reinvestigate it and clarify to make sure we're all on the same page. That includes teachers, students, parents, community members, all members of our school community. Now, I'd like to just show this because we're going to dig into this example. So one of the ideas we come with very often before we have a webinar like this, we're looking at the outcome of service learning as the key indicator of what's going on. So here you have this photograph of produce being sold. This is in Yokohama. You'll hear more about this story. And we can often say service learning is about students selling produce they raised. But I'd like to take a different look and not just look at the service, but really dive into what the learning is that lends it to make this a more effective teaching pedagogy, because this is happening in our schools where the richness of learning should be all around us. So let's start with service and learning and what the term means. Just last week, I led a workshop with 50 high school students. Oh, is that exciting? They're from 5 different schools, and we had a morning together, and they were all coming as service leaders at their school. And the teacher said they all knew what service learning was, but honestly, they really did not. They knew what an interpretation of service was and what service learning might be, but they were missing many key elements. So I started with this experience where they looked at what service was, what learning was, and then they constructed their definition. So take a look at what they defined it as: gaining knowledge and uplifting others to create an empowering positive change. This is from students. And when students engage, we know that they're really, really, grabbing on some key concepts. And I have a strategy where I don't give definitions. I'd rather we construct them together so that students aren't just memorizing what came before them, but they're really thinking through what words mean and creating their own construct. So service and learning. I'd like to also present some other ideas. I'm reading a lot of books right now, children's books and young adult books, to help inform my work in service learning, because I think books can anchor us in doing really good service learning work. And one I recently read is Yours, Mine, and Ours, all about a celebration of our involvement in the community. And in the book, Arun Gandhi, uh, Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, they talk about seva. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, which is Hindi for compassion and uplifting. And I was very moved by that because in the student definition, they talked about uplifting. And I thought that was really lovely that they saw that it's uplifting others and ourselves, so we all lift up. It's not us doing for others, we're doing with, and in that relationship, we all gain and we all grow. And it's also about knowledge, skills, and dispositions that's wrapped in curiosity and application, that we want to use what we're learning in meaningful ways. So I wanted to share this book that I typically carry with me in my suitcase and share everywhere, about Shigeru Ban, who uses common materials, tubing, paper tubing, to build housing, chairs, and beds when there's been a disaster in all kinds of areas around the world. It's an exquisite book that makes students want to know more, develop their own skills in that area, and then do things, really take action. So I just want to remind you that literature is one of those sparks that can give students that curiosity and the desire to really move into action. So service and learning. I'd like to show you a different drawing made by students using community engagement, passion, and awareness to combat an issue. So when I have different groups doing this and we combine the definitions, you really see that one group talks about one element, one about another, and we create this collective definition. I want to take you over to Shan, China for a moment, where I did this with students. These were high school students also. And I wanted you to see them working on this process so that maybe you'll try this with your own students. And they came up with service learning is to use knowledge to help the earth. But when you look, I have a little arrow in the middle of the page, you see that under service, they talk about apply what we learn into our real life. And I love that. That service learning is all about applying. Now, we can use our learning in many ways. We can use it to take a test, to create a report, but very often that report ends up in a drawer. It doesn't see the light of day to help another organization or someone else. I would love to see all this wonderful research students do connected to an organization that needs that research. So what they're doing and learning can always find these applications. And recently I worked with a school and we figured out how you can use calculus, let me just mention that again, to do meaningful service learning. So now I know we can do it in every curricular area. So how do we do this? So for me, the guide points are the 5 stages of service learning. So just for fun, could everybody put up their hand and show me 5, just for fun? Let me see some 5s. Yeah. Oh, I love that. One more time. 5. Yeah. When I did it with the high school students, I had them repeat 5 so many times, they're hysterical laughing because I think it's in repetition and in doing things we remember it. So forever you're going to remember when you hear how many stages of service learning, you're just going to go 5. Am I right, Rachel?
See?
Yeah, it's 5.
That's such a good way to remember it.
I know, I know. I'm going to have you do something else in a minute, so get your hands ready. All right, so there's 5 stages, but let me just say, this is just good learning. We could call it service learning, but it's also just good learning. And some people have said to me, why do you have to call it service learning? And in truth, I'd rather not have to call it anything. I'd rather just call it good learning. I'd like this to be so prevalent in our schools. It's just how we teach. because in doing so, it elevates the learning, it elevates teachers, it gets kids excited and engaged. It's really an answer to so many questions. So if you look at the 5 stages, you could see the word that's right in the middle. Rachel, what do you see right in the middle?
Curriculum.
Yay! So it's about curriculum. So it really moves the curriculum forward. That's why I just want to share again, it is not an add-on. Let's just throw that concept away. That for me, service learning can move the curriculum forward. Now, let me just say that service learning can fit in many constructs within a school. The students that came to work with me the other day were doing it in student councils and through clubs. I'm hoping it ekes back into the classroom as well. There was some classroom activity. But even if you're doing this with student clubs and organizations, when students follow the 5 stages, they will really improve the dynamic of both what they're doing, why they're doing it, and keeping students engaged because they know the purpose of what's going on and they know the questions they have are being answered. I know we want to do service for a college application, but it can be so much more than that. So when we think about it in a curricular context, anytime you're learning, we want to make sure that we're investigating the topic. That just makes sense. We're investigating. How we investigate and what we investigate and the methods we use will deepen with service learning, in part because we're investigating ourselves, we're finding out our interest, skills, and talents, and we bring that to the forefront. That is so critical in doing any kind of work in the community, but any kind of work we want to do together. If I know, Rachel, that you love to draw and we're doing a group project, I can pull your drawing in. Otherwise, you might be an outlier, and I don't want outliers. I want everyone to be in the group. So knowing our interest, skills, and talents is the format. And then investigation, I also propose using a wonderful method of research I developed called the MISO method of action research. It's an acronym with a lot of resources on my website I hope you'll visit using media, interview, survey, and observation. I'll repeat that because that's so critical. Students unfortunately think that Google equals research, but that's another error in our judgment. That it's all about using different modalities to discover. Of course, we use the internet, but we also use books and maps. We interview experts. We survey people to find out the more of a landscape of what people are thinking of a topic. And we also observe, which we all need to get better at observation. This is deeper investigation. And when you do that, you inevitably discover some real community issue because you're connecting with real people in real time. And this you could do at all grade levels, I want to mention, kindergarten, preschool, all the way up, with modifications as kids are younger, of course. So once we know the issue that comes up from a deep investigation, students always want to go right to action, right? They just want to do this stuff. But we need to say, no, 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 no. We pull them back in. So first we have to prepare. And through meaningful preparation, we get the knowledge, skills, and dispositions we need to come up with a plan for action. Now, if you remember okay, Rachel, this is a quiz for you. How many stages of service learning?
5.
You got it. Okay. Yes, yay. But we have to adjust that when we talk about how many types of action. There's only 4. So let me see some 4s over there. 4, yeah, 4. 5 stages, 4 types of action. So I like to break them down so we make sure we're doing all different kinds. Because if we're only doing indirect service where we don't connect and see with people, we're keeping the issues at arm's length and not getting involved. So we want to make sure students have a variety of experiences, that they have direct action where they work directly with people, the environment, or animals, where they see and connect directly with their hands, or at least with some form of personal connection. You could even do this on Zoom if we must. Then there's indirect, where we're creating materials for other people, but we may not see them. There's advocacy, where we give voice to a cause. And then there's also research service, where we take that research that we did in chemistry class and we provide it for an organization that needs that research. That's research action. So 4 kinds of action, 5 kinds of service. So very often we need to focus first on that investigation, preparation, action circle as we're learning the process, and then we build into more ongoing reflection and demonstration telling the story. I'll talk a little about reflection later. Everybody good? We got 5 and 4. We got this down. Thank you, Christian. I like that. So I'm going to go back to that original story, that original slide of Yokohama International School, who have as their mission statement, live, learn, lead. And these guiding words shape an environment where students explore who they are, how they connect with others, and the difference they can make in the world. Service learning is really thick in this school. They're really learning how to make it deeper and integrated in the curriculum. Now, you could just look at this one picture and think that all they did was they created some produce and they sold it. That's the service. That's partly why I don't call service learning a project, because then people always want to go to the outcome. I want to hear about the whole process and experience. So I'm going to share with you what they really did in grade 2. They used books like Pharma Eva's Green Garden Life, which is a book about a woman growing herbs. Oh, what a great book. This book is just phenomenal. I just got to interview the author Jacqueline Briggs Martin yesterday, so I know the story behind the story. But this woman has been growing herbs and tending the soil, learning about soil. You love this book, and your kids would love this book. You can use this with all ages. It's got deep science in it. So the students read, they asked questions because we always do an inquiry-based approach. Service learning has long been inquiry-based. And then they started growing the plants. Now, part of the learning involved high school kids coming into their classroom and teaching them about issues related to poverty and how if they grow the herbs and sell them, it will have impact on people who are food insecure at Chiku Center, which is an organization they work with on a long-term basis. Partnerships that are sustainable, that are mutually beneficial. So this is part of the learning. This is if you just saw the herbs, you wouldn't know this was going on. So the students are growing, they're counting, they're measuring, there's science, there's English, there's social studies, all the subjects can, come together as they sell the herbs and then they grow, they raise funds. So this is a complete service learning cycle. Now, I'd love you to take a pause and look at this exquisite board created by the teacher, because it wasn't just the process, it's the collecting the story of the process, the story of the research and investigation, the story of the preparation. And you can see, if you look closely, you'll see kids writing, kids charts, kids measuring, kids digging, kids analyzing, and then the action going on and reflection with their questions that still carry them on to further learning. So it's in the demonstration and the gathering of the story that we get that metacognitive part of what service learning is all about. Good story. Yes, everyone like the story? I love this.
Story.
It's just wonderful. I got to see the garden. It's absolutely beautiful. So what kind of criteria do we use or do they use to make sense of service learning that works in most contexts and settings? Now, I do know I've been to many, many schools. I've been to 55 countries doing service learning workshops in person. I also do virtual work. And I know that schools are different, but there's certain criteria that does cross over, that we always want to activate the curriculum with curiosity and with questions. This is a stable part of service learning that we let students, ponder and wonder and think about what's going on so that they really build the questionability that really guides the process. Even if we do our own planning, and I know teachers need to plan. I'm a classroom teacher, I plan, but we have to leave room and know that we can let go of some of that control so student voice emerges. And that's the next point. It's not just about student voice. I love student voice, but very often we hear about, I want student voice. Well, I want it to go further. I want voice and choice. So students get to make choices to see what happens with their choice. We don't have to always get it right, but when students' voice and choice carry the process, we know that they're feeling activated and they're seeing what's really going on in the world. And then they make adjustments, they pivot, they learn how to think on their feet, and that's all part of the learning process. We always want service learning to develop sustainable reciprocal partnerships. And I love the word reciprocity because there is an exchange going on when we do meaningful service learning. And we really want to make sure that's evident. And this comes about by building consistency with what I call an asset-based model. Let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So very often we can approach service learning with a deficit-based model. I know I did. Okay, so true confessions of a longtime service learning person. I know there were times early on that I entered a community seeing what's wrong with that community. Well, there's a few things wrong with that statement. Rachel, what do you think about that statement? If I go in a community and say, what's wrong with you? What am I kind of communicating?
You're communicating that you're in a better position than they are, and you're just here to, judge and try and put whatever your judgment is onto them.
we're going to just all unanimously agree that's not the right approach. I think we can just make that as a flat out statement. That's not the way we want to go. So when we do that, we're giving a very poor message. We're saying we're here to fix things. We're here because we know better. And it's just creating a terrible dynamic. Um, Instead, I think we want students to enter another space and community as a guest. We're here as their guest. We're
Mm.
here to learn from and with them. And by looking at the strengths they have, the assets, which are always there, they're always, even in the poorest community, we can make a long list of the assets that are going on in every community. And we start there to build relationships. And we also see that they have aspects that we lack, and we work together. And that's why it's mutually uplifting and reciprocal. And my good friend Shea Asensio made this visual for me about that assets. And this is a term I just want to mention students don't know. I've never walked into even a high school senior class where they know what assets are beyond looking at a financial analysis. That assets can be the structures they have. It could be in their natural environment and how they interface with that natural environment. It's the history they know. I once asked a friend I met, an artist in Ghana, where he was from. If someone asked me, I say, well, I'm originally from Texas, but I live in California now. He went back 5 generations to tell me about his ancestors. That's where he was from. He knew his
Mm.
history. So where are we from? What's our history? What's our story? What are we carrying in our everyday life? What are the existing programs that are around us that we've created for our own benefit? What are the people, the culture, and our other valuable resources? When we start there with assets and we share those assets, we're really building community knowledge. And I just want to say in every school, we have an under-resourced population of people who work in our school, who drive the buses, who do the landscaping, who work in the cafeterias or our cafes. These people bring extraordinary assets and knowledge about our communities that we will make a huge miss if we're not drawing them into the story. There's only one school actually in Jakarta that let me do a workshop for the people who are the landscapers and the bus drivers. And they say, oh, we know how to do this. This is how we live all the time. This is what we do. And make sure if you go into that part of Jakarta, you take Jose the bus driver because he's from there. So
Mm.
think of this. Think of the knowledge that's all around us when we take an asset-based model in the community, but also within our own schools. I just love that. So when we go through the 5 stages and the process, we solidify the language of learning. I walked in one school and they had this up on the wall so students learn this language. I've been in schools where this design is up in every classroom. So students know we're investigating now, we're preparing now, we're taking action now. And they live that language and it really helps them as learners when they want to design their own experiences. It elevates purpose in our direction. It builds meaningful understanding relationships and provides a landscape for meaningful reflection. We've all seen students put together a reflection that says, I went there, it was nice.
I had fun.
Yeah, I had fun. Yeah. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're looking at a real landscape of learning. So that's a landscape for you. I took that picture when I was in Hokkaido in Japan. So what provides a basic landscape for reflection? There's 4 key elements to that. And there's a tool I developed that just has this on it as a frame. So what happened? We need students to share what happened for them in that experience. Because I guarantee you, what happened for me would be different what happened to Zara, and what happened to Christian, and what happened for Rachel. We'd all have our own experience. There was a story about students in South Korea who went to an orphanage. And as you would imagine, most students wrote about the children, about what happened. But one child had never seen a goat before, and all he wrote about was the goat. Now, I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to say there was a goat, right? So I need to know what happened for each person. And from there, we could say, well, how did I feel about it? That's the foundation of reflection, the cognitive and the affective coming together. And then what are my ideas stimulated? And always what questions, because we always want to lean into questions. I just want to note that on my website is one of my favorite articles I've ever written called Meaningful Reflection. I invite you to read that and to see if that's a spark for you. It gives you some ideas. And I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts. Even whatever I've written after that, it's still my favorite article. It also was a huge influence in the CAS guide, the current CAS guide. I was a key author of that CAS guide, and I wrote the reflection section. So you'll find a lot in the article goes along with what's going on in CAS. All right, let's talk for a moment about curriculum, because as we said, curriculum was in the center, right, Rachel? That's right in the heart of it. So let's just talk a little bit. Often when I do curriculum workshops, I like to ask what guides your curriculum when you're designing curriculum? What do people often think of when they think of this? What designs curriculum? Think of that for yourself. What are the influencers? Now, I have a lot more to share with this, but I'm going to highlight just a few points of what can help guide our curriculum. One is the questions. I'm real question focused, as you can see. It's just all about questions. I know teachers, actually, it was at NIST in Bangkok, who said, we really can't start designing our curriculum till we hear what the questions are.
Mm.
That was very exciting and brave. Most of us at least want to go in with a game plan before we get to the questions. I'm a game plan person. I like to have that, but I also know that the questions should help move the curriculum in ways we did not expect. So if we think we've got it all well planned, we must have flexibility for those student questions. And do students' questions move us to action? Are they questions that say, how can my daily behaviors help influence the use of plastics at my school and at my home? So, what are the questions that are moving us to actually do some form of action? And we need to identify those up front because that's part of the compelling that gets us to take action later on. If we just start talking about action at the end of what we're doing, I think that's way too late. So, start seeding this along the way. How else do we seed it? By the humans we meet. Who are they talking to? Are you bringing in an expert who knows about a certain topic that will lean into how students can be engaged in helping with uh, students who are have some special and different abilities who need somebody to play sports with them? Are they meeting those people? Are they meeting someone from the energy company who talks about how we can reduce energy waste? So, what human stories advance knowing? And are students learning how to interview? Now, this is really key. I've developed lots of information on interviewing techniques for students because I want students at all ages to want to ask questions. But I tell you, if you give a first grader a clipboard, you have just empowered them. They love to ask questions, and anyone with a clipboard has got a sense of, I can do this. So we really want to build that question asking skill and then put them in the place. We start with them interviewing each other to find out their interests, skills, and talents. They interview their parents and others to find out about things that matter. And then they interview people in the community to really know how to get this all done. And of course, books. I just have to go back to books for just a minute. What are we reading? What books are we reading? Are we weaving current news into learning? Now, obviously, there's a lot going on in the world, and we never want to upset or frighten children, of course not. But there's a lot going on in the world that's also good, that's shown in the newspapers. Wherever I'm in the world, I try to find an English-speaking newspaper, and I find amazing stories about people helping each other and people doing good. So what's going on that's good, and what are the things that they need to learn about connected with their learning that is in everyday life? And what books build curiosity, and what books show youth taking action? I want to share two titles. There's a series that one of them is Old Enough to Make a Difference. Now, this should just be in every grade, every school. It's about real students doing things with fast fashion and growing things and meeting the needs of loneliness in the community and dealing with poverty. It's real stories of real kids. And I've done deep dives about these kids. I know they're real. So it's a book that sparks curiosity. If kids can read other kids doing it, they say, well, I can do this too. These are not exotic stories. These are real stories that are accessible. There's another wonderful book called Breaking Them, and Old Enough to Make a Difference, I would use with every student. I think picture books should be with everyone because I can't read War and Peace out loud, but I can read a well-placed picture book to 11th graders to get them feeling and thinking and caring and wanting to take action. Breaking the Mold is good for middle and high school students about how we think about scientists. That very often we have a perceived notion of who is a scientist. And this is 16 stories of scientists who come from marginalized communities and are female and have disabilities and that are changing the face of science climate. This is a remarkable book. And when students read it, they again want to be more engaged. Also, think about what matters to you. And I mean you, the people watching this. What matters to you? What gets you up in the morning excited to teach and engage with students? If you can find your personal connect to that issue because you also want to make some change in the world, this is important. Now, I really do think that most educators got into education not necessarily for the money. I just say it just isn't always the driving force. But I do think most educators I've met get into education and approach it because they want to make a difference in the lives of children and families and communities. So this is our driving force. So if you can connect with what matters to you in the curriculum, how you connect with it, and you see yourself as being able to have impact, you'll translate to the students that same sense of agency and urgency. And there are always things we can do. Service learning does not have to be huge. We could start with small steps. But I'll just warn you, if you don't like surprises, don't do service learning because sometimes those small steps can grow into big, exciting things we just don't know. And that's part of the excitement. I love surprises. And I think if you know everything that's going to happen in your classroom when you walk in that morning, that's not what education's about. There should always be a lot of unknown. And we're willing to accept that and step into that. I think that's where the real magic happens. So, is service learning a catch-all phrase anytime a student does good on behalf of others? What do you think about that? How many people think yes and how many think no, maybe, and how many think no? Let me get some viewing. Anybody think yes, maybe, or no? I got a no from Rachel.
You can put it in
Anybody?
the you can put it in the chat if you prefer. Feel free to
Yes, tell
pop
us in the
it.
chat. Let's hear some chat going on. Is service learning a catch-all phrase? And also, if it isn't, what other terms could we be using when students do things? What could we use? If we want to avoid service learning as the catch-all, let's think of what we could call it. Oh, that would be so fun. Right, I've got some ideas. Somebody write something in there. Oh, I think it's coming in. Rachel, what are you seeing in there?
I see community community service
Hmm.
as a different phrase there. Go ahead and place it in the chat. Also, as people are adding to the chat, excuse me, I had put a link in the chat to the Meaningful Reflection article
Oh,
from
thank you.
Kathy's website and to a couple of the books that Kathy has popped. And the top link in the chat is to Cathy Berger Kaye's website. So if you're looking for that.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you, Rachel. Um,
Um, so other things in the chat are community engagement and someone saying, no, I don't think it is. Charity work comes up as a
oh,
term, which is an interesting one.
yeah.
Um, I think, oops, I lost it. If I think the learning part is so important and it can't
Uh-huh.
be disassociated. Golden action, putting the golden rule into action.
Golden action. I've never thought of that before. That's so interesting. You know, I love this. And I do think I did a whole study of a community engagement, which I know is becoming a popular word these days. Rachel, did you see something else pop in there?
There's learning, sorry, if service learning has we in it, we do it together, the we matters, and we
Oh,
make an impact and then not necessarily live the action.
hmm. So, see if I can remember this. So there was a school that I visited once, and I heard this amazing story. It was about a little girl, like a kindergartner, first grader, and every day the kids would get together in a circle and talk about things and talk about their mission of the school, which would be global caring citizens. That was their mission of the school, to be global caring citizens. So on a holiday with her parents, they were in a hotel, and she saw a woman over there drop something, and she ran over and picked it up and handed it back to the woman. The woman looked at her and said, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." And she was just overwhelmed that that child would run over and take that initiative to do that. And she looked at the mother with pride and the girl with pride. And the little girl said, "I was just being a global caring citizen."
Oh, I love that.
You know, so for her, it wasn't something other than this is who I am. And I think this is important that very often when people do things that are good, I love it. It's like we could comment on what a generous act, what a kind act. You know, that was something thoughtful. I appreciate that. But I do think that the service learning requires us to step out of our normal comfort zone just enough that we're actually making an intentional something or other. You know, I often ask if I see trash next to a trash can and I bend down and pick that up and put it in the trash can, is that service? I asked that those high school kids the other day. It was a great discussion. And what we decided was that that's just my responsibility because I have the ability to respond, to bend down and pick that up. Thankfully, I have that physical mobility. But my friend Pedro once saw that, and he saw so much garbage. He organized 20 of his friends to go in the neighborhood. They got paint donated, and they did a whole graffiti paint out, and they cleaned up the neighborhood. That was service learning, and how they did it involved the neighbors coming out and making them cookies and desserts, and how it brought people together. So let's celebrate what we do in that respect. So when we look at all of this and we think of, is this really service learning? I think we're on our way. I think it's important that we have a measure for ourselves and for our schools to think about what are we calling it, and not to deny the value in it, but to add more value to it. So, for example, the high school students I worked with the other day, they realized that a lot of the students who joined their clubs didn't even know why they were really there. They joined the club because it was good on their resume or a friend was there, but they didn't even have time in their club meetings to say, what do we want to know about mental health for young people? What do we want to know about the refugees in our communities? So it's important that whenever we approach the service construct, we really take the genuine time to do the learning. We break it down and we honor that part of it. And then I think we can transform many of these things, whether it's community service or acts of kindness. We can bring that into the structure of service learning and really make it effective. So those 5 stages really become that template and really do help us out. And I think if the school can value service learning as a pedagogy that supports other priorities. When I go into a school or I interview and speak with the school head or the administrators at a school before I go there, they always want to talk about service learning right away, but I don't. I always say, what are other priorities of your school in your school right now? So let's get a couple people to write down what are some priorities in your school right now that aren't service learning. Like, let's look at what are some priorities going on. And I'd like to see if we can make the connect to service learning. So what's a priority at your school? Anybody have a priority for me to think about?
Differentiations, MTSS, inquiry, sustainability, well-being.
Okay, let's just start with those four. We could do more, but if we look at differentiation, service learning is naturally differentiated. It always has been. In fact, before the term differentiation was even invented, we noticed that service learning gave every student in a class ability to do things. I'm thinking also of a school in St. Louis. There's a school for children with autism. And it was a perfect example. They were doing work with a wildlife organization that they were gathering sheets and blankets for the wildlife organization because that's what they needed. And they were going there to actually meet the animals and work with them. And if you think of all the different range of abilities on the spectrum of autism, there were some students who actually got to wash the clothes in the laundry they had at the school, so they got to do that. Other students got to actually fold and pack things. Other students got to carry things. Every student had a way to make their voice heard and feel participatory. When they got there, they realized that the organization also needed fundraising. So on that inner circle of service learning, that action took them right back to investigation. And what they did was they realized they wanted to raise funds, but they wanted to add learning because the school's all about learning. So they decided, since it was about animals, they would make no-cook dog biscuits and sell them. So they made it a little entrepreneurship. And again, every student in the school had ways that they could participate, from designing the logo to packaging to doing the cooking. So every student was involved. And this is true in any time you do service learning. So you get students who love to do this part, do this part, do this part, and you really get a collective act, which is really how real life works. When we get a project in real life, we draw from different people's abilities. So another one was sustainability. That service learning is really designed to create sustainability environmentally, because that term can be used in different ways, and also sustainability in our community partnerships. And it created a thread. And it's very important that schools document what they're doing in service learning so they create a legacy so that teachers leave. I know that can happen often within our schools, that the legacy of what happened stays on so we really know how, and we could pull up those stories and use them again. Another one was well-being. Am I right? I think
Yes,
well-being.
well-being. Yes.
Oh, good. So long ago, I learned a lot about happiness theory. And one part of happiness theory, which is really interesting, is two key elements of happiness theory is that when you use what you're good at for the well-being of others, bingo.
Mm.
So with service learning, if you follow that idea, that first we find out what are our interests, skills, and talents, and then we use those and harness those to engage others in practices within the community that elevate and lift up everyone, that helps with our well-being. We also come to know aspects of ourselves that we never noticed before and of others. So for example, there might be a student in the class that doesn't really participate well, but in this case, they found a real purpose to get involved and really showed up in ways they hadn't before. And a student's reflection might be, I really didn't know that Ryan knew how to participate that really well. That way, I really admire how he showed up for us. So we can really learn how to share with each other what we see in each other that is elevating and creates a more collective well-being. So I think I got two or three of those.
Mm.
So I always ask, so when we connect service learning with other school priorities, it becomes even less of an add-on. We can see that it's integral to inquiry-based learning, to sustainability, to developing more practical math skills and applications. I've not yet found an area that we can't connect it to. So use that also as an place to get administrators and leadership on board. Now
It's
it's
really
also, yeah,
happy.
go ahead.
I've just been
Mm.
reading a little bit about pruning and this idea that we're
Oh,
doing too many different things in schools. And I do think that there's absolutely a place for that. But I was talking to a school leader from Singapore yesterday about concept-based inquiry, and he said actually it's not, for us, it hasn't been about pruning, it's been about understanding how the things that we are focused on are connected. And so
right,
that's exactly what you're saying here. Like if you have lots of different things in your strategic plan, you're going to overwhelm teachers until you can show them how these things are connected and how
right.
working together and having a solid plan for that, you're actually hitting all of these things. So that's a beautiful way to think about it.
I remember it was a while ago. I was in Baku, and which was a wonderful international school there, and I was using this graphic, this organizer I have called Across the Curriculum, where we look at how the topic, let's say, of immigration can fit into all the different academic areas. And all of a sudden, this gal Maria bursts out. She says, "One of our priorities is interdisciplinary learning. I didn't know that you were going to hit on that." Right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so service learning has so many elements, and I think that's really important to think about. And if you're looking for ways to connect with your priorities and you can't find one, email me. I love getting emails for teachers with those questions, and I'd love to be able to answer that for you. I'd help you think about it because sometimes it's not apparent, but if you dig in, I know you're going to find it. It's also really important to create understanding. I could go into schools, they say, oh, we have a definition of service learning, but that doesn't mean there's understanding of service learning. So we need to make time for that. Anything worth doing well done requires some professional learning. And for me, it was really always about help, and it still is, working with faculty or educators at a school to see who really gets different parts of it. Like there's always a teacher who really understands how to do amazing investigation, and then build that talent so that person can be a lead for that element within the school community. Who's really good at that inquiry-based model? Who's really good at doing reflection no matter what's going on? They seem to be able to pull it together. So we want to be able to look for talent within the school in these areas. And so we all, of course, there's times you want to pull in external resources, professional development. I'm not ready to retire yet, so still bring me in. But I always want to develop and cultivate the internal talent that can help keep this going so that teachers are really building those capacities. I think that's really important. And also with students, I was so fortunate once I was in Beijing and I asked them the next time I come back, bring together students from different schools, like what I did in Los Angeles recently. And we had 60 students, 10 students from each of six different international schools. And I gave them a full one-day workshop on service learning, and the task was to go back to their schools, and they led professional development on service learning. They were terrified, and they did a great job, and they couldn't wait to do it again. So it's not just, teachers who can teach this. We can really consistently and thoughtfully build student leadership in this to really help them understand. And I have a lot to say on that. That'll be another webinar, Rachel. Um, and it's important to recognize the benefits across the whole school community, that this is something that benefits not just part of us. So I think even when a school is new to service learning and they're starting small, we want to make sure we share what's going on. So at a faculty meeting, say, can I just ask, who knows, who has a contact in the community about um, for playing sports with kids who are underserved in our community? Who knows somebody? Let people know what you're doing. Even if you're the only one or there's three of you doing it in the school, be big, be verbal, be visual. So other people get curious about what you're doing and you pull them in as you can. It's really important. And if you're in a country where you don't speak the language, use the language experts around you and the local people in the school community. So language isn't a challenge, it's an opportunity to connect with more people. And make sure you capture and tell the story. I want to hear it, so let us know what you're doing and let your school community know. It can take a while for people to really understand what service learning is. My daughter's elementary school, it took 2 years for the whole school community to really understand it well enough where we didn't have to define the term every time we used it. But then everybody knew, and it built in. We had parent liaisons for service learning. We had service learning going on in lots of aspects. The administrators understood, and new hires were educated about it. So everybody was brought on board. So I hope this gives you some good ideas on how to know what the answer to is this really service learning and to really ignite it in your schools and make it richer and deeper. And I'd love to answer some questions.
Much, Kathy. I'm just going to pop a link into the chat now for the conference. So if anybody is interested in coming and doing a full 1 day workshop with Kathy, we have that as a pre-conference available. And Kathy will be doing a keynote presentation at our concept-based inquiry conference. So thank you so much. Pop your questions into the chat now if anybody has questions for Cathryn. I actually have a question for you. When I am planning with teachers, quite often I will hear them say, and the action for the unit will be, and then they'll tell us what the action they're planning to do, or sometimes what the action is and has been every year for the last 5 years. Now, I too am a planner, but
Mhm.
it's not necessarily something that I advocate for to have that final action already planned out. Tell us your thoughts on that.
I understand it. First of all, I understand. I get it. And I'm sure I've done that. And however, where I lean into now is I say that might be the action. That's an idea. That's one of the ideas for action. Let's think of other possible actions and let's leave room for student voice to come in and see what that will be. I had this one teacher who they were doing something on well-being or something, and the kids, she had it all planned out what they were going to do. I don't remember what it was, but it was all planned out. And the kids wanted to do something on hand washing. She did not. Like she did not in the worst way, like in the worst possible way. And she just had to let it go. She had to let it go. And the kids did the most astounding, mind-blowing study of hand washing. And they were having a school event with all these adults coming. They made them all go wash their hands before they were allowed to go in the meeting. I mean, they did so much to impact their community that was well thought out, well designed, much better than what she had in mind. So I think it is legitimate, but I think some of this has to do with how much we're willing to let go of control. I always like to talk about control. I was going to save that for the keynote, but we all like to be a little more in control than we might need to be in the classroom. And the more we let go and shed some of that need to be in control, um, the more room we get for real student curiosity and ingenuity. One other thing I want to say on that is this requires us in the process of teaching to do something I call under direct. Every time we over direct students, and we all know what that looks like when we tell them way too much what to do and how to do it, we're taking away their inquisitiveness, their thinking, their planning, their ideas. So in everyday classrooms, we need to change some of our behaviors if we want to really cultivate student voice and student ideas.
That's so important, I think. And it's hard. It's
It's
hard. We
hard.
all want to be well organized. We all want to, make sure that we've got the term mapped out and we're ready for that and we want to book our field trips, but to
Well,
be able to take that
I
step
just have to
back.
share another example that will show what can happen. I just sometimes these ideas come to me and I just have to share. This was in Northern California, actually. Um, and the students had been studying Chinese New Year. Oh no, they weren't studying Chinese New Year. I'm sorry. They were studying composting. They were studying composting in their school. They were like a third or fourth grade class. Fun, dirt, worms. all good. And then they were done with that unit, and then they went on to study Chinese New Year. And it was a community that was a huge, big event, and they had a big deal about it and a big parade and all that. And so they were studying about Chinese New Year, and one boy raised his hand and said, "What if we had a giant composting worm in the Chinese New Year parade?"
Love it.
Now, I could imagine many of us, including myself, saying, "That's a lovely idea, but we don't have time for that right now. We're studying, we're going on." But the question, all the kids lit up. And the teacher said I think the right thing. She said, "I don't know. How do we find out?" And they found out there was a committee that governed it. They had to write letters. They had to learn about letter writing. And then they got the response, yes. And then they didn't know what to do next. Then they had to figure out, how do you make a giant worm? So they had to get the teacher, the art teacher. They had to build this paper mache thing. This derailed what she had planned. Would you agree? It did
Absolutely.
take up more time than she expected. Is there any doubt that all those kids remember that and will
Mm.
remember that forever? And even if it wasn't that one kid's idea that got manifest, everybody in the classroom knew that I can manifest an idea. And I think that's what it's really about. It's about the composting worm.
I do think that that's one of the most essential things that we can do as adults is to listen to students' ideas, suggestions, and as you say, help them to realize that those ideas can be manifested into reality because sometimes young children's voices will actually go much further. People will listen to young children in a
I
way that they don't
know.
necessarily listen to adults. But children need help to actually take that from an idea to reality.
And those are the skill sets we want to give them. How do you make a phone call? You don't just attack the principal in the hallway, you make an appointment. And these are skills that they'll learn and they love it. Again, give a kid a clipboard.
Absolutely. There's another question, Kathy. Do you think service learning is harder to value in developed or privileged school communities where there may be less awareness of underserved groups and individuals?
Could you should be the very beginning of that question again? Do I think it's what?
Do you think service learning is harder to
Hmm.
value in developed and privileged schools where
Oh,
communities may not be as aware of underserved groups and individuals?
what a great question. Um, I think service learning is is hard everywhere in some cases because people once they understand it and once they're determined to do it, it gets much easier. But the notion of it can be harder. I just want to say that. But just because it's new, any new pedagogy, any new approach can seem hard. So it's not harder than most any other pedagogies in that way. But I think we have a responsibility in every school we work in to make sure students understand community and what community looks like, and community can look like different kinds of aspects. And that's why elements that we talk about the deficit model or an asset-based model. We talk about privilege and poverty. We need to understand what these terms mean, not in a way that's accusatory or blaming, but that when we understand what words and concepts mean, we can be more genuine in our interactions. We want to avoid it. I'm reminded of a teacher said to me, we flew to some country where the students were going to paint a wall in a school, which that's not really a great idea to do necessarily. And they got to play with the children. And one kid wrote in her reflection that she gave that child the happiest day she's ever had in her life.
Mm.
Now, there's something wrong in the lead up to doing that service or what they called service. There's something wrong with the dynamic and in the looking back afterwards. And those are the things when they happen, it's good that we find out and it's a red flag. We need to rethink what we're doing. So we don't create those kind of images for children that they're saviors. So we must work with all the children, whether they're kids from highly privileged schools and backgrounds or privilege and opportunity. We want every child to benefit from this and to understand that element. I'm a guest, I'm an interactor, I'm a participant, I'm a catalyst, all the different roles that we can play in being part of community. Because ultimately, I was telling someone the other day, what I really want my daughters to grow up is be good neighbors. And I want that for kids too, to be good neighbors and be able to be part of community for the rest of their lives in meaningful and purposeful ways.
Fantastic. There's another question from John, Catherine. What are some successful ways that you have seen students design service in action projects that involve learners from different grade levels working together to make a difference in the community?
Okay, so first of all, I think it's important for students to have experienced service learning within their own academic class before they're designing that so they know the elements. When I
Mhm.
was doing a lot of work with IB, it was actually put in the MYP guide for those of you who are international baccalaureate schools, not that you have to be, but if you are in the MYP program, it was recommended or encouraged or quote required that every grade level did a service learning experience within academics so students understand the parts. If they don't understand the parts of it, it's going to be much harder to design anything related to service because they won't really know what the stages are. So we need to have them understand that and then help them do that kind of mapping. I think have them look at um, the different roles the different grade levels could play. Um, and again, based on students' interests, there might be some students who are really good at art who might want to work with younger children. Other students who like doing sports want to work with a different age. So we build off of students' interest, skills, and talents to match them up with the different grade levels they might want to work in and pull them in. And also use the teachers as consultants. Have them interview the teachers. What are the students working on? What do they need? What's the learning that we can support? I hope I got, I think I understood the question. I hope I got that to you, John, and that was a way to-
Have you seen examples of students working together from different grade levels?
oh, to do service learning?
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely, all the time. Um, so the thing to remember is it always doesn't have to be older students guiding younger students. It can be the reverse. So one example was in Prague where students did this whole bakery and they raised money. And then they went to the CAS students and said, tell us about your projects. We're going to pick which one we fund. And then they worked together. But the kindergarten kids had the power of where the money would go. And then they worked together to do work on for the food bank. So I think there are many possibilities and ways kids can work together, again, drawing on their strengths and interests. There were some students I know who did a ninth grade, fifth grade combination where the ninth graders were learning about fractals and they were having a terrible job learning it. So the teacher said, your grade will depend on how well you teach fifth graders what fractals are. So,
Oh,
so the ninth graders had to learn, they taught the fifth graders, and then together they created a mural about fractals for the community.
beautiful.
So there are a lot of ways that kids can work together. I think finding common interests, it's interesting. We learn the water cycle in many different grade levels. Find out who's learning the water cycle, learn it together, and then do something with it. So find these so we can do it ladder, we can do it all different ways.
Fantastic. All right, thank you so much. I think that's the last of the questions. And thank you everyone for making the time to join us today. We do hope to see you, many of you, at our conference in Europe. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll connect in other parts of the world. That's one of the beautiful things about the international community.
Yes.
So,
And I do hope you have my email here. If you have any questions, love to hear from you. I really enjoy working directly with teachers and answering any other questions that we didn't get a chance to touch and hearing what you're doing at your school. That makes my day. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. Wonderful to be with you all.
all right, thanks everyone. See you next time.